Hey class, in this video I want to go over the story arc. The story arc is the most recognizable format in narrative genre. You'll recognize this from probably junior high school, 7th, 8th grade. The story arc starts with, and I'll explain what all these lines are in a second, but it has specific and distinct plot points that look like this. And this is described in many different ways. The wizard hat, I like to think of it as the mountain. These are plot points on the just perfect formatted genre specific narrative story. If you want to fit the mold of the prototypical narrative, this is what you're going to follow. And it starts with exposition. Exposition is your background information about the protagonist, your character. In this case, that's going to be you because this is first person. It's going to be your personal essay is a first person account. Just want to make sure that is clear. That was implied but never explicitly stated in class up to this point. But this is about you. You're not writing creatively about someone else. You're writing about you from a first person perspective. So the exposition is giving a little bit of background about you and the experiences as it lays a foundation for the story. You hit a point of conflict in the perfectly written narrative. And I say perfectly written, I mean according to this format. Something happens that creates a problem for you or for your protagonist. It's the exposition, it's just a normal day. It lays a foundation for what is normal. So the exposition is perhaps you're driving to school on a normal day, driving to school, taking the route you normally take. You're seeing the same trees and flowers on the road and dealing with the same, your coffee's in your hand and everything's the way it normally is. And then bam, you hit that pothole and you get a flat tire. Or bam, someone rear ends you at Smith Inky right as you're about to make that right on Porter Road. Hopefully that's not a foreshadowing. It's the conflict. All right, so something happens that changes or disrupts the normal events of the day. And this is what story and narrative is all about, right? So we don't typically talk about the mundane events of our lives. We can, and we will, just in interacting with friends and making small talk. But when it comes to writing about something, or when it comes to telling stories or giving speeches, using anecdotes, we're talking about events that are meaningful and memorable and have meaning, that are different, that are outliers, that are not everyday occurrences by definition. So the conflict is something that's happening to your normal day that turns it upside down. You have rising action or complicating action as a result of that conflict and as a way of working towards an understanding and ultimately a resolution of it. So it's the sequence of events that happen as a result of the conflict. Here it says it usually gets more intense over time. That depends, again, if you're talking about the perfect, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, narrative, formatted story. Yeah, it would get more intense because your reader would generate momentum. And just like I think of this narrative arc, I mentioned it's climbing the mountain. I also think of it as a roller coaster. So when I think of rising action, I think of that roller coaster going up. The metaphor of a roller coaster doesn't serve the other parts necessarily of the narrative plot line, but for rising action, it does. It gets more intense. Your heart starts beating a little bit more faster, a little faster. And then you hit that point of climax, which is supposedly the most exciting part of the story, or the turning point, or that point at which you have illumination on understanding, or you can start working toward the resolution because you've got the fix, you've got the understanding, you've got the tool you need. You've been rescued. Right? The conflict was you had an accident on your, you were going on a normal flight, to Aruba in a little private plane, and the conflict was major turbulence caused the plane to go down. So the rising action is everything that happened, getting out of that plane, getting on your safety lifeboat, trying to survive, figuring things out, having arguments with people, trying to decide how you're going to hang on one more day and ration your food. And all of a sudden the climax is when that helicopter with those wonderful sounding, blades swirling comes to your rescue. And then you have the falling action, events that happen after the climax, and this leads ultimately to resolution. Resolution is going to tie up the loose ends of your story. It's going to show you it's going to show your reader how things have changed, how things will never be the same, or perhaps things are back to normal or as close to back to normal as they'll ever be. If it's something simple like a flat tire, your resolution is going to simply be, yeah, the guy, showed up, AAA guy showed up, gave me some water, he started fixing my tire, I texted, my friend to tell her, I'd be late, but I'm still going to make it. And then the guy goes about his way. I get back in my car and go about my business. If your resolution is the rescue from the plane crash, then perhaps things will never be the same. But you can also give a perspective on that through resolution of how it's never gonna be the same, and you have some sort of perspective on that situation. So again, we have our narrative arc, our narrative story arc, looking like the wizard hat or the roller coaster or the mountain or any metaphor you want to use. Now, we're not going to talk about narrative writing like we would for other classes in so much detail, but I will briefly go over some of the strategies and ideas that we typically talk about when we discuss narrative writing as a specific and distinct genre. So if you guys do want to look at this, you can. Your story typically, to the extent that you're telling a story like we just described on the narrative arc, you need a strong beginning. There's several ways that you can do this. You can have a dialogue that takes place, a question, a vivid description, an interesting fact, sound effects. Dialogue would be something along the lines of your story starting with, "Hurry up, or you'll be late. Called my mother from the bottom of the stairs. Today of all days, you want to be on time. If I had only known what that day would bring, I would have stayed in bed." Okay, so this is a nice little hook that creates a little bit of intrigue for your reader. Like, wait a minute, what's going on? Wonder why this person wished they had stayed in bed. What's going to happen? "Hurry up or you'll be late," called my mother from the bottom of the stairs. Today of all days, you want to be on time. What is it about today that's special? Why today? And why is this in point of contrast to this person saying that if I'd only known what today would bring, I would have stayed in bed? Yeah, today was the big day of my speech or the presentation I was giving at work. Well, maybe not for your mom waking you up, hopefully, but the spelling bee, whatever it is. The science project. Man, if I'd known what that day was going to bring and the disaster that was going to ensue, I just would have stayed in bed. You can also have, as part of this, simply a question. So a question would be in the form of, have you ever had a day where you wish you'd stayed in bed? As I rushed to catch the bus on what seemed to be the perfectly normal day, I had no idea what was ahead of me. Again, this is a hook. This is a hook created by a question. We talk about anytime you have a question that you pose to your reader, this is presupposing that there will be an answer and that you will give the answer and it's going to be interesting. We also have the idea of, let me get my screen here so you can see all this. We also have vivid description. So I'd probably, yes, you can use this. Don't get too carried away with this. I had some students last year that would start every piece of their writing with some overly vivid descriptive element. The sun was warm on my back as I raced toward the waiting yellow school bus that glistened, in the reflective glow of that sun. Don't overdo it. So give a little bit of vivid descriptive detail that allows your reader to be present with you and to see what you see. Again, it goes back to show versus tell. You're showing them. They're there with you. They have your eyes. So the sun was warm on my back as I raced toward the waiting school bus. As I nestled in the worn leather seat, I was greeted by a friendly voice of other excited children. The look on my face was one of confidence and contentment. With a jerk, the bus rumbled down the road, and I was on my way into one of the worst days of my life. All right, so we set the stage that it's otherwise a normal, sunny, beautiful day, sitting in that same weathered seat on the school bus that sort of indicates this notion of, hey, it's been sat in every day. This is just a normal day, normal routine. My friends talk to me. Everybody's happy. Everybody's ready to go. And then the bus jerks. I think that's interesting that the person used the specific terminology jerk, because that's almost like a foreshadowing of what's going to happen to them. They're sort of just jerked out of this otherwise pleasant reality of the beautiful sun and this happy experience of confidence, and all of a sudden, boom, they're jerked. So also do this with your writing, with the very words you're using and describing it. Give an indication to your reader, a little bit of eye candy. Remember we talked about that? Give them a little nugget. Give them a little Easter egg. Give them a little vantage point that is almost like a little puzzle, a little puzzle piece that you're throwing down in there that later that they can fit into place. So when you mention jerk, that is not only descriptive of what was happening with the bus in the moment, but that's also a metaphorical use of language that relates to this notion of being jerked and thrust into this experience that's going to be a bad experience. And in contrast, which would be a otherwise normal day where, hey, if it would just been a normal day, everything else was normal with the sun and the yellow school bus and the friends, it would have been great, but this wasn't a normal day. And now as a reader, you're wondering, hey, what's going on here? You're jerked into the scene along with them. You can go for an interesting fact. Gotta fix the size of this. I apologize. You can go for an interesting fact. This will be less useful in your personal essays, but you could do this. I don't see this as often, but if you can craft your personal essay in a way that you can effectively utilize this, that'd be great. Shock has been known to kill 10-year-olds. It can cause their brain to explode and their heart to stop dead still. These facts raced through my mind as I stood dumbfounded in front of my 5th grade classmates. I wish I'd stayed in bed. Again, interesting fact. Not sure if that's true or not, but that's always a fun thing to introduce into your story. Sound effects. Speaking of sound effects, I got some in the background. Sound effects are also effective. More sound effects in the background. Buzz, the sound of my alarm clock, droned in my ears as I struggled to come awake. With a start, I sat straight up in bed. This was my big day. I had to be on time. So sound effects are good. Sound effects are relatable. Sound effects are showing, not telling. So the very buzz of that sound clock has got your reader there with you and imagining that experience. Again, show, don't tell is the method of writing that works really well in personal essays. It's personal, right? It's relatable. We'll talk more about rhetoric and ethos, pathos, logos, but it also ties into that. You're trying to make your story relatable. You're trying to create a little bit of empathy, and you're also doing that by showing, not telling. Telling has this very explicit, didactic, sort of like you're teaching or you're telling someone how they should think and experience something, a story, whereas showing allows them the breadth and latitude to experience that story for themselves on their own terms, while you still have a chance to get your point and your message across in the way you want to do it. And it leaves that space of negotiation in between writer and reader where hopefully it meets up, but if it doesn't, that's okay too. So instead of saying Susan exercise, you would say, and you guys know this, I mean, this is elementary, right? This is a college class, but again, I want to go over this. Sweat poured from Susan's forehead as she continued to do 100 sit-ups. Again, be descriptive. And here's our plot line again with the beginning, exposition, conflict, exciting, also known as the inciting incident, rising action, climax, working toward resolution. I'm not going to go over all this, but if you want to freeze the screen at any point, you can. You just have the beginning of your story. You're talking about yourself. You're giving a little bit of exposition. Then you get to the point. And we don't have a lot of time in our essays, being 500 to 750 words, to go into great detail about characters and setting and exposition. It's just going to be very, very brief. Middle, you're not going to have time for all of this in yours. So if you are looking at structural formats of an essay and the narrative arc, just keep in mind you're not going to have time for a lot of action, a lot of dialogue, much sensory detail, some but not a lot. Thoughts and feelings will be a part of it, but you're not going to be able to draw this out on any grand scale, even similar to what you guys that were in my class last year did for your personal narratives. And then at the end is just your perspective on how things return back to normal. if you were to Google story structure, you would find a lot. Hey, there's that mountain that I talked about. That's kind of cool. I'd never seen that before, but apparently that person's got it envisioned as a mountain as well, which I guess makes sense. Oh, that's cool. I swear I've never seen that before. Well, actually I have. Take that back. I have seen somebody use the roller coaster before. But you can do a simple Google search, and you can pull up any number of these type of plot pyramids or plot points or narrative structures. We're not going to go into detail in any of this in class or in the readings or in the lectures. This is stuff that you guys can either bring into the class from your own experience and you can refresh your memory, or you can expand on through your own writing, making your own voice and authenticity a part of the experience. And you can certainly do it by using any structure you want to utilize. We talked about the E structure. One of your readings last week was the story structure of the E. And also, I'm going to link you to this article this week where it gives you some more structural ideas. This will be a voluntary, I guess, what do I call it? You don't have to read this. This will be a voluntary reading, or just extra reading if you're interested in it. So I will send you guys this as well. Beyond structure, the other point I want to make about structure is that you don't have to follow any discernible structure at all, at least narrative structure. And you'll see and I'll discuss in class, and you'll see in one of my in my unit overview that I talk about that on Canvas, where you don't have to use structure. You can just write reflectively. The main thing I'm interested in is your ideas and the projection of your ideas and the way you want to project those, not so much structure.